Yeah, I hope everyone's week is going great so far. It's a pretty windy, kind of fall-like day here in Amsterdam, which is kind of nice. Hopefully, wherever you're tuning in from, you're experiencing some kind of great autumn weather or perhaps early spring, depending on where you're from. But yeah, to kick off this session, I'd actually love to start by posing a quick question, which is, have you ever been in a Miro board and wished for a specific feature or capability that didn't yet exist natively in Miro? Well, if you have, that's actually precisely what Miro apps are for, and where the Miro Developer Platform comes in, which is really a way to expand on the capabilities and the use cases that are already possible in the Miro that we all know and love. Before we jump in, just a quick note about myself. For those of you who are new to our developer community, my name is Will Bishop, and I'm a staff developer advocate here at Miro. I'm really passionate about web development and product, especially when it comes to building Miro apps, of course, which is why I'm really excited to dive into our web SDK today and show you guys how you can create an awesome Miro app of your own. But it's not just me here on Miro's developer relations team. We also have Maria and Carla on my team as well, and they'll be keeping an eye on the chat throughout. So please feel free to post your questions as they come up in the chat, and we'll make sure to cover them at the end during our Q&A time as well. And if there's a question you really want to make sure that we don't lose track of, I recommend using the Q&A feature specifically as well. So what exactly are we building today? Well, in this session, we are going to be focused on building a basic Miro app that is accessible from within a Miro board. And we'll do this using our web SDK. So for those of you who are new to the platform, this specific webinar, assumes little prior knowledge of our developer capabilities, but that's not to say that, it won't also be helpful for those of you who might already have some knowledge of the platform. We'll get into some examples and inspiration. So there should be a little bit of something for everybody. So first, I'll just start with a quick overview of some of the topics that we are going to dive into. So to start, I'll quickly tell you a bit about the platform and how we're going to leverage it. Then I'll dive into some of the finer details around our local environment setup and creating a boilerplate app from the command line. I'll raise some important points about Miro Web SDK development specifically. I'll walk through some example web SDK methods and how to style a Miro app. And then at the end, we'll have some time for a bit of community inspiration and Q&A as promised. So to ground today's session, I want to take a moment to introduce Miro's developer platform, which refers to the combined power of our web SDK, our REST APIs, and our live embed. So today, we're going to be focused exclusively on Miro's web SDK, which is our primary front-end capability that allows you to create an app that runs directly on a Miro board. And although we won't get into too much detail on our REST API and our live embed capabilities today, for those of you who are curious, you might consider these for use cases around integrating Miro with a third party or embedding Miro directly on a web page, respectively. So all three of these capabilities live separately from each other in some regards, but keep in mind that these can be, and often are, used in combination to build creative solutions that leverage one, two, or perhaps all three of these. So with that in mind, let's jump into the Web SDK. A bit more detail on the Web SDK. So this is a JavaScript-based library that is accessible from directly within your browser's developer console on an open Miro board. And we also offer an NPM package to be able to create a new Web SDK app directly from your command line, which we're going to do in just a moment. But what does a Web SDK app look like in Miro? So if you're not familiar, the look and feel of an SDK app will vary depending on the styling and the functionality that you add. But you will find that all of these apps live in an app panel that's open from the left-hand side of a Miro board. These can have their own custom UI, modals, and more. And you can access these directly from this toolbar, as you see here. So let's actually just dive into getting started with a boilerplate. So I want to get our local environment up and running for our Miro app. And what are we going to need for this? So it's quite simple. As long as you have a Miro account and an IDE or a code editor, you'll be able to follow along as I create a developer team and an app in Miro. And of course, if you are trying to follow along, you'll be able to appreciate that this will be recorded. So no pressure. You can always watch later and rewind me and watch certain steps over again as well. So I'm going to start by leveraging the create-miro-app NPM package for bootstrapping an app. So I'm going to hop over to my code editor, and I've just created a directory on my local machine, and I'm going to run this npx command to start compiling this boilerplate app. So if I go npx create-miro-app at latest and run this, it's going to start compiling a boilerplate app for us. And it's going to ask us a few questions. And the first is, what do we want to call our app? So we can just populate this with a name. I'll call this September webinar. And then it's going to ask me to pick a framework. So we have a few different things that you can choose from. We have React, we have vanilla JavaScript, Vue, Miro Node client if you're just using our REST API. And then we also have a Next.js framework that combines the Web SDK and the REST API if you're interested in building a full stack kind of app. But for today's purposes, since I'm focused just on our Web SDK, which is a more front-end focused capability, I'm just going to use React. And then it's going to ask me what kind of language I want to use. I'm going to use TypeScript today. And then it's going to start compiling all of our dependencies here. And you'll notice that once this is done running, so it says, our app has been set up. It's going to say, create your pre-configured app in Miro by clicking on the following link. And I'm just going to copy this and then paste this into my browser. And this is going to bring me to my Miro app settings, where I can configure certain details for the app that we're going to run within our Miro account. So if you've never done this before, the very first thing you would see is a prompt to create a developer team. And that would just be one additional click, and you'd hit, continue. And then you'll see this modal here that says create a new app. And this is populated with the information that we just used in the command line. So we can go ahead and click create app under my developer team. And then I'll just quickly talk about the details of this page. So here you're going to find details about our unique app that we'll be building. So there's a client ID and a client secret. This is a bit more relevant to if you were using our REST API. There's also the app URL space. So this is specific to the Web SDK. And this is where your app is going to be hosted while you're developing. So for today, we're going to use localhost because we're just making a local copy of an app. But for production, you'd want to host this on an HTTPS URL. Or some kind of hosting service. Next, we have the redirect URI. This is for OAuth as well, so we won't worry about this today. And then lastly, I want to cover this permissions section. So this is where you will select the scopes that your app has access to. So when someone goes to authorize your app and install it in their Miro account, this is what they'll see in terms of what your app can actually do and what permissions it has. So for today's purposes, we're just going to leave the boards read and boards write scopes, meaning that we can create and manage items on a Miro board on behalf of anyone who installs our application. And then lastly, we're going to go ahead and install this new app under our account. And I'm going to install this under this team that I created for today called September Webinar, but you could install it under any team that you'd like. We hit add here. We'll see that our app has been installed. And so this was the very first step we had to take in order to get everything configured in Miro. So with our app installed, I'm now going to go back to my code editor. And I'm going to first I'm going to open up this project in my code editor. So I'm going to go File, Open. And you can see this new directory was created when I ran that npx command. So open this up. And we'll see here we have a bunch of boilerplate files that you can see were created by this npm package that we ran. We open up my terminal once more. And then I'm just going to make sure I'm in the right directory here. Okay, perfect. So you can see all these files that were part of this boilerplate app. I'm going to run npm install to install all of our dependencies. And then I'm going to run npm run start to actually get our app up and running. And so now our app should be running on localhost. So we're going to go back to our browser just to verify that this is up and running. And here we see this kind of generic Miro text letting us know that our app is up and running. But next, we want to make sure that we can actually launch this from within a Miro board because that's the whole point of using a Web SDK app, right? So how do we make sure that our app is actually accessible from within Miro and not just here in our browser? Well, that is the next step that I'd like to talk through. So after we've authorized and installed our app from under our account, as we just did from the app settings page, there are a few other things for us to consider. So first, I want to note that Miro apps built with the Web SDK are launched from the left-hand toolbar, and this is accessible from within any Miro board, as I mentioned. However, to ensure that an app you've created actually appears here in the toolbar, we need to do three things. We need to make sure our app is running. We need to make sure that it's subscribed to an icon click event in our Web SDK. And we need to confirm that it's been authorized and installed under the team to which the Miro board we'd like to launch it from belongs. And I'm going to quickly run through each of these three things. So if each of these three things is true, then our app should appear in the left-hand toolbar when it's fully extended. So first, let's cover the icon click event that I just talked about. So this is basically saying that in order for an app to be accessible from the left-hand toolbar, it must be subscribed to this event. And if it's not, then that app is going to be considered like a headless app, so to speak, and it won't appear to end users in Miro. So there will be no icon for them to click to actually launch the app. But the good news is if you're using the create-miro-app command to generate your app like we did here today, this is included by default in the index.ts file, which I can show you real quickly right now. So if we go to our app and we go to source, index.ts, you'll see here that we have this icon click event already being listened for, and on click, it would open the app panel. So this is what I'm talking about when I say that your app has to be subscribed to this event. If you were not using our boilerplate app generator or NPM package, and you were just creating your own app from scratch, this is something you would need to make sure that you include in order to make sure that your app will be accessible. So going back to this, one other thing I can point out as well is if you go to our developer documentation at developers.miro.com, you can also just search for a lot of the things I'll be talking about today, like icon click. There's an article dedicated to adding this event listener to your app. And this covers all the steps I just talked about right now. So definitely a handy little tool to be able to search for certain aspects of our SDK. So back to our slides here. The next thing I want to talk about is basically making sure that we can show this in the app. So we've confirmed that we have this event listener already subscribed. We have our app running on localhost, and it's been authorized. So we should be able to launch this from the toolbar. So let's go ahead and go to a board under the team that we already authorized. So I created this test board under this September webinar team. And if I go in here, you're going to see that there's this plus sign that says more apps. And there's a little blue dot above it that signifies that something new has been authorized. So if we click on this and we go down here, we can see we have this September webinar app, and it also has a little blue dot there. And if we click on this, it's going to launch the boilerplate text that we already saw. And in this particular instance, the boilerplate app also creates a sticky note by default. So we have a working app now. It's up and running on our Miro board, but we want to take it a bit further. So with that in mind, let's take this time to add a little bit of style and a little bit of new functionality. So I would like to create like a button or something that generates content on the Miro board when it's clicked. So for that, we can, maybe create a sticky note or something like that. But first, I want to just give us a clean slate. So I'm going to delete the sticky note. I'm going to go back to our app. And I'm going to go to app.tsx, where the main meat and potatoes of the app is. And I'm just going to go ahead and remove some of this boilerplate content. So here we've got, all this good stuff. I'm just going to go ahead and take this all out. Hit save. Go back to our app. You see now we've just got this image, and now we can add some stuff on our own that we'd like to add. So the very first thing I'd like to do is, rather than just using any old button, I want to leverage some of the pre-built Miro-styled components that are available via Mirotone. So Mirotone is our out-of-the-box CSS library, which offers all sorts of great components for you to use. So I'm going to go and access that through mirotone.xyz, which is where we host this CSS library. And when you land here, you'll see that we have all different sorts of components. You can use this for inspiration on ways to lay out your app. There's different templates, and you can simply copy the HTML right from our library here. But for today's purposes, I just want to copy a button that is already styled in the Miro kind of look and feel. which every component on Miro Tone is. So for this, I'd like to use an icon button combination. So I'm just going to copy one of these pre-built buttons, maybe this one right here. I'm going to go back to my app, and I'm just going to add in this button directly that I copied. Because I'm working in React, I just want to make sure I update class to class name. And if I hit save, go back to my app, we can see I've got this new button. And now I want this button to actually create a sticky note when we click on it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a function called click handler. And within this function, I am going to first just console log something like hello, just to make sure it's up and running correctly. And so I've got this console log, and now I need to call this function from within my button. So I'm just going to add an on-click event, and I'll call click handler, and I'm just going to hit save. And I'm going to go back to my app here. I'm going to quickly open up the terminal. And if we just clear this out, we can ignore a lot of the stuff that's in there. If we click on this button, we see that the hello is showing up in the console here. It's kind of small, but okay, cool. Our button's hooked up correctly. So now what I want to do is generate a sticky note using this button. So I'm going to simply go to our Web SDK docs. I'm going to go to our reference for the Web SDK, and I'm going to find the thing that I like to create, which is a sticky note. And our docs are set up so that you can easily find a code snippet for just about anything that you want to do in the Web SDK. In particular, I just want to create a sticky note here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just directly copy this code snippet. And we'll be leveraging this create sticky note method in our SDK. I'm going to go back to the click handler function that I added, comment out my console log, and just paste this in like this. And if I hit save, I guess I'll change a few things as well. Maybe instead of yellow, we'll make this light blue. And we'll say this is a sticky note from click. Save this, go back to our app. And we can see now every time I click, I add a new sticky note. So we're, just kind of scratching the surface of, how we might add contents to a Miro board. And this is cool and all, but I'd like to just take it a little bit further. And you'll notice that every time I click this button, it's actually adding a sticky note in the same exact spot, which is not very practical and probably not something we'd actually use. I want to go ahead and find a way so that when I click this button, these sticky notes are actually added in different parts of the board so that they don't overlap with each other. And for this, I'm going to use a recent method that we just introduced called find empty space. It's an experimental method in our Web SDK, and you can find it in our docs by just typing in find empty space. And if you go here, it's going to bring you right to the relevant place in the documentation where we can actually go ahead and copy the code snippet from this. Let me just go back up here. Whoop. Here we go. Okay, so you can see here it says experimental, and I just want to be very clear about this, that I wouldn't recommend using this in production because it's relatively new and we're still, making some changes here and there. But once it's stable, this will be a great way to make sure that you can, use this helper method or this utility method to be able to more easily position items on a board, because that can often be a big pain point where you don't know where certain items are, and you'd have to understand the coordinates of where like each particular item is on a board. But with this, we can leverage this method to just tell it how much empty space we want per item and where we want to start on the board. And from there, it'll help us position objects when we create them on the board. So I'm going to go ahead and actually just copy this directly from the documentation as well. And I'm going to go back to our click handler, and I'm just going to go ahead and comment out what we just made. And I'm going to replace it with this new experimental method. So the first thing is we're setting the position equal to these parameters that we're passing to the find empty space method. So we want to start at the center of the board, essentially, and we want to designate a space of 200 by 200 in terms of like the empty space that we want to allot for where we're going to place an item. And then down here, we're actually going to call the create sticky note item again, or method again, but we're going to specify the X and Y coordinates in relation to this position variable. So for X, I'm going to say position.x. For Y, I'm going to set that to position.y. And then I'm going to go ahead and also set width. We'll set that to position.width. And for sticky notes, you only have to present or designate a width or a height. You don't need to specify both. So if I go ahead and hit save here, and I go back to our application, I now should be in a situation where every time I click the button, it creates the sticky note in a way that it's not actually overlapping with any of the other ones. So now we have a more kind of practical application of, something you might want to do to organize content on a board. You can imagine it wouldn't just be sticky notes, but maybe images or something like that. I want to add maybe one more button just to show you guys, like one more kind of method you could use. A pretty common one would be to generate an image or something on a board. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this button and we'll create a new one where we're going to generate an image on the board each time it's clicked. And I don't know if you're a cat person or a dog person, but I am going to call this the pug button. And every time I click on it, it's going to generate a picture of a pug. That's the idea, at least. Now, I'm going to call this one image generator. And now I need to create a function that actually handles this. So I'm going to go back up here, create a new function called image generator. And for this, I now need to identify a method in the SDK that's going to actually allow me to create an image from a URL. So I'm going to go to our documentation here. I'm going to go back to our reference section. And much like we went to find the sticky note before, I'm going to go ahead and look for the image item. And I can see it right here. And very similar to what we've been doing with the other methods so far, we can basically just copy this directly from our documentation. It's going to leverage this create image method. And I'm going to place this within this new click handler. But instead of this boilerplate image, I want to replace this with a pug. So I'm just going to go to some kind of royalty-free website like Unsplash. And we can just quickly search for some kind of pug. Lots of great choices here. I like this guy. I think he's got a really good Tuesday vibe, kind of like sleepy and rainy. So I'm just going to copy this and paste that in here for my image URL. Hit save. And now if we go back to our app, we should see a pug button. I'm just going to close the console here. And every time we click this pug button, it should generate an image of a sleepy pug. So again, this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to, creating content on a Miro board and using the SDK to do so. But it gives you a sense of, where you could, use this as a starting point. So with this in mind, another thing I want to point out is that you don't just have to, use your code editor. You can actually access our web SDK directly from the console in a Miro board. So if you open up the console here, and if you just type in miro.board, you're going to see that we expose all the different methods in our SDK right here for you. So for instance, you can click on the UI and see different like event listeners that we have. You can click on experimental to see what items are currently there for you to play around with. But there's a huge benefit in this to that you could be working with something and maybe you need like the ID for an item on a board so that you can test out the API, but you need to pass an item ID parameter, but maybe you don't want to have to like call the API in order to get that ID. Instead, you could do something like select a few items on a Miro board, and then you could just run await miro.board.get selection. And this is actually going to return the two items that we just selected. And this is just a really easy way to play around with the Web SDK and kind of see things in real time. If if you're on a Miro board and you just want to kind of quickly play around with things programmatically, you can also update things. So just another way to access the Web SDK outside of through a code editor or in your browser console. You can also go to our developer hub right here, and you'll see we have a bunch of quick start guides for getting started with the Web SDK. And within our guides, we actually embed the Web SDK and board picker, so you could quickly select a board under your account and then run the code from this embedded editor to actually create a sticky note. So this is a great way to get up to speed with the SDK and kind of follow our guided onboarding to make sure you're learning how to interact with items and understand how easy it is to just get started. Again, this is really just scratching the surface when it comes to leveraging the power of our Web SDK. So for today's purposes, I've kept it quite simple, but you can imagine all of the sorts of things you could do. And I think the idea is we want our documentation to be so easy that you can easily discover new methods and play around and do things at your own pace. So what else is possible with our Web SDK? Well, rather than continue to walk you through these methods, I want to take a moment to highlight what other people have done in our developer community. So to give you some kind of real life examples. First, we have the story of Veteran. He is a full stack engineer and founder of Hookshot Software. He has built several apps on our developer platform, such as Super Search, Easy Translator, and most recently, he built a new app called Video Clipper, which allows you to upload recordings and generate transcriptions to play clips right on a Miro board. The reason I'm talking about him is because he was an early adopter of our platform, and he's found a lot of really popular use cases that were requested by our community, and he's capitalized on these. He is I would say a true success story for maximizing our capabilities to complement end users' experiences of working in Miro. So both Easy Translator and Super Search, for example, these two apps were inspired by our community wish list. So he's an app developer that has found success in listening to what people want in Miro, but might not actually exist yet. Next, we have Max Harper. So he is someone who is the founder of Refractive Strategy, and that is a team that builds on Miro full time with our Web SDK and other capabilities too, of course. So another early adopter, Max has built several apps and plugins on the platform like Power Pack and the Colors plugin that's available as part of it. And his apps and his creations are just another great example of how custom apps can empower really specific workflows and leverage custom logic to kind of elevate end users' experiences in Miro. And I kind of alluded to this, but for both of these developers from our community who kind of bet on and build on Miro, several opportunities have come to them as well. So for instance, Veteran has written blog posts for us about his journey on building on the platform and been able to expose more users to his apps. He's also implemented monetization. You can read the full story on our Miro engineering blog. We could also see another example in Max, who we've featured in our community newsletter and was a speaker at Distributed. So, what's the point here? Well, really, you can do so much on our developer platform, and we love to share, the stories and the experiences from people who do build on it and display that power to Miro end users globally. And there's a lot of them. I think we're at over 60 million users now. So really, the world is your oyster when it comes to building Miro apps. And like I was saying before, both of these developers built apps that focused on common requests from members of the end user community. So if you're looking for ideas to get started on your own app, our community wish list is a really good place to start. And this is where you can see, the most requested features to inspire your next app or integration with the platform. So to kind of start wrapping up here and round things out, a quick look back at what we explored today. So we covered each of these facets of the Miro Developer Platform, an overview of our platform and the Web SDK specifically, how to set up a local environment and bootstrap an app from the command line, launching an app from a Miro toolbar, and the essential SDK methods and Miro tone. And then, of course, the community inspiration that we just talked about. So if you're feeling inspired, then I hope you're ready to come build the next big thing with us. Yeah, and really we invite you to kind of get your hands dirty and leverage all the resources of our developer community. So you can find me and Horea and Carla on the Miro for Developers Discord server, as well as meet other developers who are building on Miro. It's a really great place to get feedback, support, inspiration. And then aside from our Discord, we also have a YouTube channel where we're regularly posting new tutorials, new inspiration, and things to really help you explore and understand different parts of the developer platform. So with that, I would love to wrap it up and dedicate some time to Q&A. So I see that we have at least one question here. I'm wondering about that event listener step in the beginning. You mentioned headless apps that don't show up, for example, no event listener. Is there a reason to intentionally create a headless app, such as a module that has functionality for use with several other apps? Yeah, this is a good question. I will say it's not a very common use case to create an app that kind of runs in the background, but you could. Generally, we see that people who are creating a Miro app are doing so because they want to be able to, provide some kind of new functionality via the toolbar for other people to access. So all of these apps that you see kind of towards the top, these are published apps that you can find on our marketplace, like miro.com/marketplace. But that's not to say that you can't also develop private apps to, meet your own specific workflows. If you wanted to create an app that didn't have the event listener and didn't have an icon, you could still create like a Web SDK app that you install and authorize that runs in the background on the board and creates a new sticky note every time you open the board or something. So if you want to have a more low profile kind of automation, you could do that with the Web SDK, but again, it wouldn't be accessible to end users. So it would be more for kind of, I would say, automating something for your kind of specific workflow. And if that is the case, then the REST API might also make more sense for a kind of background style job. Awesome. Great questions. Okay. From Adam, does the SDK expose methods to register keyboard shortcuts for these apps that work alongside native Miro keyboard shortcuts? That is a great feature request. So transparently, no, not at the moment, but this is something we've heard about before, and I definitely agree that would be really cool. So it's a great suggestion, Adam, and something we definitely are happy to take back to the team. It would be very cool to be able to, have hotkeys to like launch an app or different shortcuts. We are focusing on in the future, creating more things like this, like being able to launch an app from like a context menu, for example. It's kind of along the same lines, and that's something that we're actually working on. If you go to our developer documentation and you type in custom actions, you can actually check out something that's a bit like this. Not exactly what you mentioned, but it does allow you to more quickly like generate an action from an app in the same kind of manner, but not exactly a hotkey, but something you might be interested in. Great question, Adam. Okay, so from Abdusami, just one question. Is there a way to play with HTML code behind the elements, or can we get HTML code of some elements using the Web SDK? That is a good question. So mostly no. That said, like if you're creating a sticky note, for example, you can format, certain aspects of like you can put a paragraph tag in here, or you could put a strong or emphasis tag in like the method that you're using in the SDK to inherit that HTML. But we don't really support like direct manipulation of the HTML of elements on the board at the moment. Though that's also a really cool idea. From Ken, without getting into too many details, can an app listen for actions in Miro? For example, when I create a certain shape, the app then modifies that shape automatically. Yeah, great question, Ken. So along those lines, I think our event listeners could definitely be used in that manner. So we do have event listeners for things like when items are selected, and then you could based on when that event listener gives you a response or lets you know that the action was taken, then you could call another method in our SDK to modify an item. So if you go to our docs, and if you just type in listener, you're going to see, where is it? You're going to see we have a section on event listeners. I recommend checking these out. That'll be a good way to see exactly what you can listen for. But to answer your specific question, it would take a little bit of logic on your end, but it could be done. From Anthony, can you configure your board to have your app load with the board in a specified location, say within a frame? Yes, definitely. So you can use the viewport method in our SDK. So if you go to our SDK reference and you go to viewport, you can set the viewport that someone will see, like what their focus area will be on the board when the app is launched. So similar to that like open panel method in that event listener, right after that, when the app panel is opened, you could then immediately set the viewport so that people are starting in a specific spot on the board. And one more question from Anthony. What kind of support do you have for automated testing of the application within a Miro board? Cypress, for example. Yeah, this is a good question. So within the Miro board itself, we don't have a testing automation, but of course, this is something you could add to the app itself. But we don't at this moment support like a inboard, automated testing. There's no like you couldn't run like Selenium tests on the board, for instance. That's a really cool idea, but this would be limited to your app itself. We've got one more question from Abdusami. I'm thinking of integrating an LLM or AI tool like ChatGPT into Miro, and I want to automate most of the stuff we build using Miro. So in that regard, I'm just thinking, for example, what input we can construct and input into ChatGPT to generate something good for the user. Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a few things we've seen so far. For instance, like mind maps, for example. This is something that could be a really cool thing to integrate with ChatGPT. So if you create a mind map on a board, for example, and let's say you wanted to have users be able to type in like a prompt here, you could have them ask like, what should I be thinking about when doing user research or something like that. And then you could call ChatGPT and have those responses branch out into new mind map nodes where when you get that response from ChatGPT, you're then calling our web SDK to create a new node and kind of adding on to a different kind of like brainstorming session. That's just like one quick example. But you could also have something like we do with Miro AI, where you select sticky notes and it could kind of summarize the content of those sticky notes. So maybe you're sending ChatGPT the content from the sticky note, it's reading that and summarizing it, and then you're sharing that with end users. Another really cool idea. But that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg and just things that are like top of mind for me. But yeah, really cool idea. Very good question. Awesome. I think that was most of the questions. So yeah, I really hope that this has been cool and interesting for everyone who is able to join. But as I was saying, if you think of something after this, then please join our Discord, join our YouTube channel, and keep an eye out for new content, new inspiration. But also, yeah, just send us a DM, reach out in our channels, talk to us about your ideas. We're happy to help you get inspired and give you pointers along the way in terms of what we've seen based on our experience, what we know will be most successful, or if there's something you just want to automate and you don't know where to start, that's what we're here for, to help you guys build apps and integrations.